Kia ora and welcome to another episode of The Leadership Lounge. I'm Katie and I'm your host, and I get to work with healthcare leaders and their teams so that they can feel supported, connected and optimistic in the work that they are doing, that you are doing. The Leadership Lounge is a space for you to take a breath, to get some fresh perspective or some new ideas on the work, the incredible work that you're doing every day. Now this week, what have the conversations been this week? Well, there's been a building up on the fact that my desk was in complete chaos last week, and it's still, I've made some progress. You'll be glad to know. I'm doing what I've said I should be doing. But this week, the conversations have been a lot about just the enormity of work. And I think when I look at some of the emails that have come through, a lot of people are writing about this topic. And I did an article on LinkedIn and a blog post recently trying to hold to those two things that I know that's come up in the past around this idea that in healthcare everything is urgent and everything is important. So how on earth are you supposed to prioritise? But it kind of really hit home this week in some conversations I had. And I had one person that just sort of was describing the world of their work, and she was like, I'm just being asked to do the impossible every single day. There is no way these things can be done. And then somebody else who we did a little bit of offloading of all the work, and we're making a list and trying to categorise some things. And it was just a massive amount of projects and aspects of work that they were being asked to do. And it was this, and it was this, and it was this. Now I can, in those kind of conversations, challenge around things and go, do you really need to do that? Do you really need to do that? But actually it's this is what an awful lot of people are struggling with day in, day out. And I am not immune to this and can often be my own worst enemy to some extent in some of that fact. And I know when I look back over my career, I would just keep saying yes to things because I enjoyed it and because I liked what I did and because I cared about what I do. So we often find ourselves in this predicament because we are capable, because we are caring, and because we want to make a difference. It's one of those factors that Nick Petrie talks around about how sometimes our values alignment, when it is very strong, can actually be one of those causes for overwhelm, overwork, or burnout. All right then, so what are we going to do? What's the fresh perspective that we can take on this? So, well, first up, I'm reading at the moment for HR Book Club a book called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. Now, there's a real irony here because I've got to try and get it finished before next Wednesday for HR Book Club. And so I'm not immune to the fact that that's quite funny that I'm trying to race through a book called Slow Productivity. But the concept he talks about in it is this idea of doing fewer things. Now, in the book there, he does frame it really clearly that the principles he's proposing are best suited to the people that are very autonomous in their work. They're either running their own business or they're a solopreneur, and how they are not completely applicable into organisations and completely not applicable directly into healthcare. But I do think we kind of can we can use that as an excuse sometimes to not challenge ourselves and to not actually think about, okay, what is the priority here? So this idea of doing fewer things, and I think when this person we've got this long list of all the stuff that they're supposed to be involved in. None of it wasn't important, and all of it had a level of urgency to it, and all the aspects had a level of impact if the work wasn't done. So this gets us into two areas that I've been probably circling around in most of the episodes that I talk about. And it's this idea of courage. Because it actually takes courage to say, no, we're not going to do that right now. Or no, we're not going to focus on that area. Because there is either a backlash or an impact that's going to occur by it. And that is really hard. And there isn't an easy answer. And I'll get to how do we have those conversations, or at least talk about the fact that we need to have those conversations. But there is this idea of courage. We've got to be really courageous. And it's this idea that Brené Brown talks around about choosing courage over comfort. And sometimes it can be easy to say yes, rather than the discomfort that can occur from having the conversation that means not necessarily a no, but it's more about I don't have any more capacity. What do I need to stop doing? The choosing what to not do is actually a really kind of evolved mindset, I suppose. And I remember once I was, and I'm sure I've shared this story, where I was looking at my calendar and it was completely overloaded, and I had to ask myself, what is it only I can do? What are the other things I can delegate or not go to, or that my input is of not value? What is it that is I am driven by my ego to go to? Or what is it that I just am curious about or want to control a bit? There's all types of motivations behind what we are choosing to do or saying yes to. And I think it takes real courage to look inward at some of those motivations and drivers, as much as the courage it takes to say to your boss or to somebody you're working with, I don't have any more capacity. Can we have a conversation about the priorities and where do I need to spend the time? I really hope that in today's world and society and the world of healthcare, that if you are having a conversation, an honest conversation about capacity and what do I need to stop doing or do less of, that nobody is going to ask you to just keep doing everything when you've made it clear that is. So they're basically saying yes to excessive work hours and yes to overwhelm and yes to burnout. I really don't want to believe that is actively being encouraged. So let's hope that that's my belief on things. This idea of having to just do it all and deliver it all is not unusual and definitely not unheard of. But I think when you get into a really honest conversation, and that comes back to that courage point around this will be the impact for me if I keep trying to do this, or this is the current impact. These are the actual hours that I'm having to do to maintain this. So there's this courage part just kind of breeds in and out over all of it. Courage to look at yourself, courage to have those conversations with people. And I think if you're a leader, you've also got to have the courage to sit with that conversation and trust the person that is listening to you and to really listen to understand rather than to impart the pressures that you're having to manage onto that person. Take some real courage and insight to sort of slow that down rather than just pass that one off, if that makes sense. The other area that it kind of circles is this idea of risk. And we can ask ourselves, what is the worst thing that's going to happen if I don't do this? If this work slows down, what is the worst thing that's going to happen? What are the impacts of not doing it or slowing down? And that can help really prioritise and sort through all the various different things. I remember doing an exercise, and I don't think it exactly works in this format for this context, but it's the principle behind it. I used a tool called, one of my favourite tools, called a failure modes effect analysis. Now, this is a brilliant quality improvement tool that is used when you are looking at a project and a process and all the steps of the process. And you kind of give them a weighting. There's a very clear structure to how you give the weighting in each of the components of it. And you can actually get a score as to go, okay, so you can look at that process and go, this is the area of most risk, and that's the area we need to focus on. I don't think it is transferable into a priority matrix, but it's the kind of the concept of trying to understand what are the factors that are important to you. So it could be things like patient safety. It could be cost. It could be staff well-being. The components that matter to you, you can use those as a filter as you're talking about what's going to be the impact if we don't do this or slow it down, or if we do it. The failure modes effect analysis was a great, it's really funny. I've made some notes around what I wanted to talk about today, and I did not think the failure modes effect analysis tool was going to come up in it. But actually, as I talked about risk and how we stratify our risk and have conversations about risk, it just kind of seemed to make sense to me. So this is kind of like an add-on, as I always seem to do. Anyway, when I was doing a project and we were looking at cardiac monitoring and How do you make sure people are going on a cardiac monitor for the right reason, and how do you know that they're coming off? This was in a ward where people were often ambulatory with their cardiac monitoring, so they'd be walking around with a telemetry system. And there wasn't really a process for it. We had an adverse event, that there was some harm, and we were so reviewing our processes for how do we know who are the people at most risk and how do we do it well. Now, my majority of my clinical career, most of it spent in the cardiology setting. I have a master's in cardiology. I am quite obsessive about some various different things, and it's certainly that time consider myself a clinically an expert. And one of the things I was very pedantic about through years of being trained and taught and teaching others was the positioning of ECG electrodes when you are doing a 12-lead ECG. And this was a real challenge for me because I could see people sticking them on the monitors and they were all over the place. Anyway, when using the failure modes effect analysis, when we actually analysed it, the positioning of the ECG electrodes for telemetry monitoring, not for an ECG, but for telemetry monitoring, didn't have an impact on the safety or an adverse event occurring. It's more about the other aspects of the process were more important. So this was a great challenge for me because I was kind of like obsessed about where you put them. And actually didn't matter. The point of this story is that when we actually sit down and consider the aspects of what we are doing, what are the impacts in the various settings, we have to be open, again, that courage part, to have our minds changed, to be less egotistical or less driven on certain aspects that we've hung on to as a truth for so long, and being open to, okay, there's actually not that much of a risk. Actually, that isn't that big an impact. So these take courage because an awful lot of the stuff, there is always some impact of some sort. I think the other thing that came from the Cal Newport book, Slow Productivity, is this idea of doing things well. And that when we are doing a lot of things, we tend to do everything badly. It's the same concept of sort of multitasking versus monotasking, and he's got quite a lot of evidence over the time that things take when we're doing more versus less. But also, you know yourself how it feels when you're trying to juggle a gazillion projects and gazillion things. It's actually harder to do and more uncomfortable and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think we factor that into the conversation of risk. We kind of say we've got to do it all, but we don't talk about, okay, what's the risk of doing, if I'd say, okay, I'm going to carry on doing all these things, what is the risk of me doing this badly? Because that's a reality. I'm going to half-ass this because I'm so stretched, so worn out and so distracted. Yeah, it'll get done. It's not going to get done well. And we might have to revisit it, or harm might occur because I've missed a step. So we've got to be really honest. Again, tapping back into that courage idea. I think this idea of the number of balls that we've got in the air is quite a good one. And just as a slight humorous aside into this world that's feeling quite overwhelming just talking about it, is we often talk about this. I've got so many balls in the air, so many balls, I'm juggling all these balls. The top tip I was given in this space that I love to share, think of them as avocados. Because actually avocados are not round, so they're actually kind of easier to hold if you're juggling. And if you drop the avocado, it doesn't roll away as easily as a ball rolls away. And if you drop all of your avocados, you can make guacamole. It is a slightly humorous aside into this, what is a serious topic, and the burnout, overwhelm that we can be feeling is serious. I'm not trying to lighten that. What I am saying is that being able to look at something with a humorous lens can sometimes help us see different answers. So on this idea of the balls or the avocados that you're carrying and holding, another way of thinking about it that comes back to that idea of the risk of doing things badly is the fact that sometimes we're going to, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is choosing to put a ball down is probably healthier than dropping it. Because at one point you're going to reach capacity and there will be no more. And it often comes in the form of physical health that stops us in our tracks and suddenly we can't do it. So sometimes making the choice to put something down and pick it up later is a healthier one, and you're not likely to break things, ideally, not yourself, in that whole process. So again, if we're thinking about it in terms of balls that you're juggling, choosing to put something down means that you won't drop it and it won't break. Now, on this kind of idea, when we're thinking about, okay, how do we prioritise? I think if you've not come across the story or the imagery of the big rocks, I think it's a nice analogy to kind of think about it. And I'm going to read it from a website, and I'll put the link to the website on there just so that I don't get tongue-tied and miss points in it. So the rocks, pebbles and sand analogy is a common way to illustrate the importance of allocating time wisely. So the point is that you're trying to prioritise the critical tasks, which are often your big rocks, over the less urgent ones or the tasky ones that are often described as pebbles and sand. So imagine then you have a large empty glass jar, and on the desk in front of you, you've got some big rocks, you've got some medium-sized pebbles, and you've got some sand. And the goal is to fit all of these items in the jar without it spilling over. Now, there's a great video on this, and if you begin by filling the jar with the sand and then the pebbles, you very quickly run out of room for the larger rocks when you try to put them on top. And the video, this woman is trying to squash them down, squash them in, bang them in, force them in. However, if you put the big rocks into the jar first, you can then fill the remaining empty spaces with pebbles and sands. So the large rocks then represent the highest priority items on your to-do list, and then the pebbles, the medium-sized tasks, and the sand symbolises all those task things, the goal, the daily task stuff, and the less significant matters. And the space within the jar represents our time. We have only got much space in your day, and so this exercise is inviting you, or this illustration is inviting you to be intentional about when and how you complete tasks. Now, like I said, it's come from lots of people have kind of explained this, and there's a couple of videos. Came originally from the idea of Stephen Covey's and his Big Rocks video, and that's the video I'm thinking about, where they're trying to crush in the big rocks into all this sand that they've put in. But there's things like, if you think about the big rocks, this is really asking you to consider what matters most to you, what is most important to you. What are the big rocks in your life? Now, a few weeks ago, we talked about values and being able to identify what matters most. So this is kind of that build on that, really. That actually our health, it's often the thing that goes because we've often left it out of the jar. So health would be a big rock. Family, that kind of stuff. What are the big rocks? And if you're popping in those times and making sure that they have the time, then you have the capacity to take on all the other stuff. So again, if you've not come across this illustration or these videos, check out some of the videos on it, because it just might give you that pause for thought. Even if the only thing is you just stop and pause for a moment and consider, what are the big rocks in my life? What are the most important things to me? The other concept that this kind of can encourage is, when you're overwhelmed, you've got this big long list of all this stuff that you're supposed to do. Another good challenge, another tap into your courage aspect, is really asking yourself, how are you working? Have you actually set yourself up for success in terms of your processes and your structures? Have you got as much automation in your systems that you could possibly do with? Are you working in a kind of a logical format? Have you got, your day set up as most effectively as possible? What help do you need in terms of design or systems or processes or rituals that are going to help you deliver what you need to deliver as effectively or as efficiently as possible? So sometimes we need some help to do that, because particularly when you're in the thick of everything feels kind of too much. It can be a really cool place to just stop out, go and talk to a trusted friend, a coach, a mentor, and say, hey, look, this is how I actually function. This is what I do. What do I need to, what could I do? What could be different? What are different ideas that I could play with? What top tips or tricks or ideas, so that you can test some things out? I don't think there is a one size fits all in this. I think we have to think about why you're doing, what your purpose is, all of that kind of stuff. It's all contextual, right? But I think it is an opportunity if you're feeling in that sort of state and it's like I'm being asked to do the impossible. It's a big sign to sort of take a lean back. Ask yourself, what are the big rocks? What matters most in this? Let's have a courage-filled conversation with my boss about priorities. And then, are there any tip, tricks, advice, systems and processes that can actually make me work more effectively within the time that I've got? It's not trying to crush everything into the day. It's trying to say, these are the most important things and this is going to help me do it more efficiently. One of the best things I like to share, I worked with an absolutely phenomenal nurse consultant when I was a nurse director, and she came to me, and we had a lot going on, right, in that kind of job. Her role was across the entire directorate. She was the person I would hand off a lot of things to, so I was quite conscious of the fact that I would just give her things to do. In all true leadership style, very terrible, but she was very courageous, has always been very courageous, and she came to me with a list. This is all the stuff. This is what I think is priority 1. This is the stuff that I think I should never drop. Here is all the stuff I've put in category 2, which is the stuff that is important, that I will get to most of the time. And this is the stuff in level 3 that I will get to if I can. But I'm probably not going to if the number 1 bucket fills up or is enlarged in any shape or form. And it was a really useful conversation. So this is the conversation that I'm talking about having courage with. Because then together you can get really aligned. Okay, how does all this fit in alignment with the priorities that we've got, wherever they are being sent from or set from? What are the goals and the objectives that we're trying to work towards, and how do all of these align? Are they in alignment with what we are being told are our priorities? And then you're having that kind of checking in kind of stuff. And it also means that she could hold me to account if I was giving her stuff, and she would be able to say, is that a 1, 2 or a 3? Because if it is, we're going to need to move some things around. I think there's 2 things here. I think wherever you are working, you need to be able to have that clarity of your work, your big rocks for your work and for your life, and being able to put it into some sort of priority setting. And then you have the conversation with your boss around stuff and with your team. And I think if you are the person who is doing let's do this, let's do that, please, because I was one of those people, or can be one of them. In fact, I am one of those people, and I do it to myself now because I don't work in a team. I'm giving myself more work to do. Oh, dear Lord. Stop and go. Think, reflect. Does this align with what I have set as my goals and priorities right now? If it doesn't, does that mean my goals and priorities are wrong? Do I need to adapt things? What's changed in the context? Is this something I need to be doing now? Can I park this? Can I put this in a waiting room until we've finished a few things? Have the courage to question yourself, as well as have those great conversations with the people that you're working with about what are our priorities and how are we going to all sustain ourselves. I really don't believe people in healthcare want us all to tip over the edge. I do believe we care about each other. And I think what we need to do is just be able to have these honest conversations about what is the work that is going on right now. All right, there we go. Oof. More lessons for me. That's clearly what this podcast is turning into, just lessons for me. Courage. Have courage to have the conversation with your boss, with your people, with your teams, and mostly with yourself. Have the courage to look at yourself and question around the different things. Consider this from a framework of risk. What are the impacts if I don't do this? And also, what are the impact if I drop this when trying to do everything else as well? What could break here if I continue in this frame? What help do I need to design systems or processes or rituals that are going to help me work to the best of my ability in the context that I am right now? And how is this all aligning with the priorities that we're being set? All right, there is no easy answer to this right now because people are being asked to do an awful lot of things. So I do not have the caveat, no, that's not the right word. I do not have the silver bullet that's going to fix all of this stuff. I'm just encouraging a moment of reflection. a moment to just lean back a little bit, take a breath, have a think, have a look at all the stuff that is on your plate. Think through it. Consider what the big rocks are. Have those conversations. All right. And do pick up slow productivity. Quite interesting. And while he's putting those kind of settings around the fact that it is more aligned to people that are in complete autonomy of the work that they do, I still think there are some handy perspectives and clues that you could adapt and pick up on. Alrighty, that's it for this week. Thank you again. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Leadership Lounge. It is a delight to be here with you. Remember to rate, like, follow, make a comment, share with other people, because it's going to take all of us to keep having these conversations to enable us to build the healthcare system and the healthcare teams that we want to work in and that we know can thrive and can serve the communities that we want to serve and that so desperately need our help right now. All right. Thank you very much. You take care. Have a great week. And remember, you are probably more than likely doing a lot better than you think you are. Take care.